What's up, Schmucks? Thanks for joining us here today. We got Zachary Gooch,
How are y'all doing?
our token white boy for our Black Panther review.
Tolkien white boy.
Tolkien or forget it.
You're off the show.
Just pulls out a...
Get out. Get
Then
out.
we got Giovanni Irigoyen, the most unprepared guest in history.
I try.
And then you got the host, Miguel Rubiera, as always. Like I've said before, I am the alpha and the omega in the Cinema Schmucks universe. I am always here and always will be.
He's the schmucking best.
Or the schmucking worst, depending on your opinion.
Schmucking worst.
So what, I kind of spoiled it, but what movie did we see this week?
Black Panther.
What did you guys think about the movie? There's a crazy amount of hype around it, and there's a lot of, it's almost like political discussion about the movie.
Oh yeah.
In regards to the political discussion, like, it would be almost impossible, and obviously, like, I come from kind of a political research background, but it would be impossible to watch this movie and not pull something political out of it. Like, there's so many themes that are brought forward. Even the UN speech at the end is just very political.
I mean, he's a king in a global not economy, but a global atmosphere. So it's like
globalism.
Yeah, in a globalized society. So it's like, of course, it has to touch on some political themes. Gio, what did you think about it?
I definitely loved the movie from the start. I got mostly what I took from it initially because you have this sense of representation from African culture. But I definitely appreciated the representation of African culture that Ryan Coogler and the Marvel Universe decided to really implement with this, because as Gooch said, in this political atmosphere, it's definitely important to talk about that there needs to be more of a representation, and I definitely appreciate that being in the movie.
Okay. Gooch, did you say what you wanted to say, or do you want to kind of...
Just overall with the movie, I really liked it. I think it presents a lot of ideas for the world that the world really needs to think about right
Definitely,
now.
yeah.
And also I loved the representation in it, because I've not seen enough of it. Obviously I don't know a lot about that culture, so it was really interesting for me to see like all the different aspects that were brought up.
Yeah, definitely. And I think representation is something we really need to elaborate on, because it's a word that's being thrown around a lot, and I don't think it just means, you know, oh, it's an all black cast. That itself, I don't think is a step. I mean, I guess it's a step in the right direction, but not by itself. You know, yeah. I think really when at least we're talking about the good representation in it, we're talking about how in depth and how, you know, well imagined this African culture was. It was brought to life. You know, yeah. It's not just an all black cast. It's like the execution of, you know, this, because in reality, Wakanda, it's not a real country, but it represents so many real countries in Africa with the culture that they, you know, because it really is just a mishmash of a lot of different African cultures. Cool. Yeah, and so it's super interesting. I think it's important to make that distinction between representation as opposed to like, oh, it's an all-black cast, and oh, it's an all-black cast in a movie that has a really interesting and beautiful vision for African culture.
It's a celebration of the culture, not just the ethnicity.
Thank you so much, because you just reminded me of something. Yeah. A lot of people are saying that, oh, what about Blade? It's like, all right, that's that's really stupid, because it's been 20 years, but also it's like, even if they were like made in the same year, oh, well, you just had Blade like a couple months ago, like, why are you so excited? It's like, A, they haven't been represented equally, so it's, you know, any representation that black people get is a step forward. And B, it's like, Blade was a comic book movie with a black protagonist. That's good, yeah. But Black Panther is a celebration of black culture. It's not just a comic book movie with the black protagonist. And so, you know what? I kind of understand some of the, I guess, flack that this movie is getting, only because this movie had like an impossible to live up to amount of hype just before its release. You know, people were touting it as like a revolution in cinema, you know? And a
trailer.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's extremely hard to live up to, and it's kind of unfair to expect it to live up to, you know? And so when I first watched it, I went in like that. I was expecting a revolution in cinema, and I didn't get that, and so I was disappointed. And I came away from the movie saying like, yeah, it was fine. The second time I watched it, this is why I feel, and we talk about it a lot, how movies deserve at least 2 viewings. I had you know, not that my expectations were lower, but they were more realistic. It's like, it's not like this masterpiece. It's not like it's just art, you know? Art is just art. And I feel like a lot of people were expecting more than that, like expecting it to be something that it couldn't be, that no movie can be. And so looking at it as a movie, right? I thought it was great. You know, I enjoyed the second viewing a lot more. Like we talked about, I enjoyed the representation of the culture. It was beautiful. It's the most unique Marvel movie by far. I think it has the most clear identity, and it feels very separate in, not in like plot, not separate, but it feels very separate in terms of, you know, it's not like, oh, there goes Thor, and oh, we got to tie this back into Captain America 4, and, you know, didn't feel like that.
I think particularly the reasoning for that is because me and you were talking about it a few, like 2 days ago, that you definitely didn't feel like Black Panther, the entirety of the movie doesn't get diluted into this cinematic universe of Marvel, because I really enjoyed that they kept it to itself. Like they were just discussing Wakanda, discussing the origins of everything, so you can really appreciate it a lot more than just
the origin story
other characters.
for
Yeah,
Black Panther,
it's a more all-inclusive story. You know, honestly, you don't need to see any of the other movies to watch this movie.
Yeah.
What are y'all's opinion on the idea that Wakanda should have, like, the movie should have included more real African culture instead of kind of creating this fictitious world?
I think it did. I think it struck a nice balance between it because, you know, it's a comic book movie. You know, like,
it's not a documentary.
Yeah, it's not a documentary, and it almost it took a lot of elements and cues from real African culture. It was heavily inspired by a lot of it.
Yeah, I think when I was looking through, obviously they traveled down to South Africa for when Chadwick Boseman and all the actors were trying to get the accent and the dialect correct. Don't want to throw any other names out because I don't want to have it incorrect, but I know that they certainly went down there to really get the culture aspect correct. Since you mentioned Ryan Coogler, how he wanted to get specific parts in it, I saw a video and Ryan Coogler was dissecting how he was paying there was a lot of attention to detail in the film, and I really appreciated it when 3 characters in the film walk into a casino for a specific scene, and if you're paying close attention to them, you'll notice that from left to right, I believe it goes, the outfits are red, black, and then green. And he detailed that he did that because of Pan-African cultures, and the flag is labeled that way. And I just really appreciated that little detail.
Yeah, I think that's a good example of, you know, how much legitimate thought went into the not only just the culture but the movie as a whole.
No, I was, because I don't know anything about the Pan-African flag, so I made a note that I want to look into that later. But so my opinion on that is that a lot of times, like when you want to get someone interested in something, you give them a taste. You don't blast, like documentaries are stereotypically boring because it's just constant information. Whereas like you can go to Black Panther and come away like, oh, I want to learn more about this, like the actual cultures, not just the culture of Wakanda. Whereas if they had just made it like, oh, just a constant information flow, you walk away from it like, oh, they focused too much on that, or like it was an overload of information.
I mean,
I think they did
feel
that
like
well.
a lot of times people describe boring movies that they literally call it felt like a documentary.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that's definitely a very valid point. In particular, I like how I think the characters are where this movie really shines. You know, the characters and how they embody, they honestly embody different ideologies. I mean, in particular, you look at Kilmonger and T'challa. At the beginning of the movie, Killmonger represents progress and the desire to, you know, move forward and improve, and T'Challa represents tradition. That changes later on in the movie, but that's, you know, what they're established in at the beginning. And I think Killmonger's definitely, I think he's one of the most substantial Marvel villains, if not the most. I mean, the other idea would, or the other contender would be Loki. But even then, Loki is good because Tom Hiddleston is a great actor, not because Loki is written particularly well. Whereas I think Michael B. Jordan is a great actor and performed marvelously, and the writing. The writing was poignant and effective and done extremely well. But how did you guys feel about the characters?
I definitely felt.
In regard to the characters, I was talking to one of my friends about it, and she was saying that there's a lot of strong female characters in this movie.
Very much
like,
so.
Almost every single female character that's presented is incredibly strong. The elite fighting force of Wakanda, the Dora Milaje, they're basically Amazon warriors. They're women.
Shuri,
she's, I think the Marvel directors have said that she's the smartest individual in the Marvel universe. Like more so than Tony Stark, more so than any other character. And then Nakia, she was a spy. Like she was one of the elite spies in one of the neighboring countries, Nigeria or somewhere. And she was in the middle of some badass mission, and like at the beginning of the the film. But yeah, so there's just a lot of strong female actors specifically in it.
Definitely, yeah. And honestly, the female actors in particular, they're given a lot of time to shine. You know, they're not just an
They
afterthought.
have full story arcs.
There's a pretty deep pool of characters to pull from, and every one of them is important.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because typically in other Marvel movies, you definitely feel they pull towards surrounding themselves around certain characters. Where if you have Tony Stark or Captain America, it feels like you can have definitely interesting oncoming characters that are on the side, but it feels like there wasn't any due diligence. But where in this movie, as you were saying, that there's such a representation of so many female leads, and you feel that it's all inclusive, and it definitely leaves you with, I guess, maybe more of a sense of pride in certain people. And I think that's very important for people to see that, and just not leave them out on the sides being diluted.
Yeah. And like we said, a lot of the characters, they represent certain ideologies. I mean, are there any characters and themes that you guys want to jump into?
Do you want to just start with Killmonger?
Yeah.
We can just dive right into that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to dive into, honestly.
He's a deep man.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not only him as a character; it's also the consequences and things that he leaves in his wake. Black Panther changes his entire outlook on the world because of the events that Killmonger puts into place. I mean, he represents everything from like, I mean, you really see like the struggle that Black people go through day to day in modern society, and I think we all come from relatively privileged areas, so we don't necessarily see it, but you talk to people that are from like, Detroit, Compton, and those are just Oakland, those are just the extreme examples. I mean, there are places that are even just like slightly less well off than Orlando, and they struggle with it, or even Pine Hills, where I'm sure they struggle with it and shit. So it's, I think he definitely represents the modern day plight of Black people, and he makes that very clear. His entire motivation is to get retribution for his people.
Yeah, definitely.
His people being non-Wakandans, even though he is a Wakandan raised in America, but for him, like, his people are all Blacks that are not from Wakanda, the ones that have been left to the side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, left by the wayside. Yeah, and that's definitely a big point in the movie, is that who
are your people?
Yeah. Yeah, and he's definitely really relatable. I mean, I think in part due to Michael B. Jordan's performance, but also he's just, written very well. Unfortunately, I don't think he gets the screen time that he might have deserved, but honestly, the movie's juggling a lot of characters, and I think it does that well, for the most part.
It could have gotten tangled up. Like, in a lot of, I want to say in a lot of Marvel movies, there's, like, they have, like, a lot of characters have some sort of story arc, but in order to focus on the main plot or the main character, like, there's a lot of things that don't get tied up, or like they just get killed off, or like they're no longer relevant to the story. Whereas in Black Panther, once again, the characters, they all have almost every single character has a complete story arc.
Yeah, definitely.
And it juggles it well.
Yeah, and speaking of like getting killed off and stuff, I think the trope of Marvel villains is that they're just, oh, I'm crazy for no reason now.
And dead.
Yeah. And Killmonger definitely isn't that. His motivations are very clear and very understandable. I mean, when you see him talking and you think about it, you're like, I kind of get it, dog.
There's like one of the main things that I've pulled like from discussing the movie with other people is like a lot of people have to think like, is he the villain? He is, for the record, definitely the villain.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of points that he makes that are like it causes T'Challa to reimagine like how he views the world, because there's a lot of truth behind what he is. He goes about it in the wrong way, which makes him the villain.
He's too
but
militant.
Exactly. But the foundational ideas are the same. It's like how with Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, they both had the same goal. They just went about it differently.
I would say Killmonger is even like he's even a step further from Malcolm X. He's more like Huey.
He's more extreme.
More Huey Newton, leader, the founder of the Black Panthers. Yeah. Particularly relevant.
Yeah, so he represents the militant side of just any ideology. Mm-hmm. So
I definitely appreciate the depth that Killmonger had when obviously we're talking about how a lot of articles are going on about he's probably, I think, arguably the best villain that Marvel or any superhero movie has had. What?
Heath Ledger's Joker.
Pour
one out.
Yeah.
No, I mean, if it's all opinion. I mean, I think that's definitely a valid thought to have.
He was saying that the most fleshed out villain in Marvel's universe.
Oh, for sure, that, yeah.
To your point, when you said that when you're looking at his motivations and you're seeing what he's going through, you really look at it and you're putting yourself in his shoes and you can understand why he's doing it. And there's no, I at some points don't really have a problem with it. Obviously, he goes to a certain extreme and it needs to be stopped from T'Challa's standpoint. But you kind of sit there and you're like, yeah, I'd probably do the same thing in your circumstances, considering what he went through at a young age.
And especially because he did grow up in Oakland, an orphan after his father died. Not really a spoiler because that happens like the first 10 minutes of the movie. It's actually a flashback. But he grows up in Oakland, and I think something that hasn't really been brought up to attention is he goes about it militantly because that's what he knows. He grew up in basically a war zone and then went into another war zone when he joined the Navy and subsequently the SEALs. Like all he's ever known is war.
It just exacerbated the situation.
And so when you think about these things, it's like very, he's definitely a relatable and kind of a tragic character because, he's such a threat to T'Challa and he's such an efficient villain. Imagine the kind of like anti-hero or hero he could be.
There's a scene later on in the movie where Agent Ross is talking about the tactics that Killmonger's implementing and how he was trained by the U.S. military like to do exactly that, to destabilize and to be very militant about how they go about things. Whereas T'Challa, like he goes about it in a much more like peaceful way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So. And I think that's especially this movie has a lot of story arcs and a lot of ideas that are wrapped in many layers, and that in particular, someone pointed out the irony to me in that Killmonger hates the colonizers and is fighting the colonizers with methods taught to him by the colonizers. So yeah, it's pretty interesting at the very least. But yeah, I think so. Beyond that, I mean, with that militant history, he feels like a very serious threat the entire movie. You don't really know what to think of him at first. At least I didn't. But there's a scene where push comes to shove, and it's like, does he stick to his ideas and his goals, or does he save somebody that he loves? And he straight up, it's a very quick decision, and immediately right there, that's probably
he didn't even have to think about it.
He didn't think about it. Yeah, it's like he'll complete his mission or he's gonna die. And nothing's gonna stop him.
Nothing comes before
And
the
you have to respect that because there have been times in other films where sometimes a villain will flip flop and it kind of loses the validity of what they're doing. But in that scene where we're talking about where he had to decide between pulling the trigger or not, and it just lets you know he means business. This isn't a joke. He has these ideas and these principles, and he's gonna utilize anyone he can to accomplish it. And
yeah, for sure.
And it's a little bit terrifying in a sense. If definitely coming from like T'Challa's point of view, you're thinking.
Oh yeah, and when Killmonger is on screen with characters that you care about, it's genuine tension.
Tense, yeah.
And he's just very much a threat. At no point, I feel like that's something that superhero movies, in particular Marvel movies, they're not great about, is that a lot of times it doesn't feel like there's actual danger. But
like when Loki invaded New York, he got smacked around. Like any superhero that got near him was able to smack him around. So there wasn't really a threat. It was just like, oh, we got a lot of like aliens to fight. Whereas in this movie, like Killmonger specifically was a threat. Like whenever he was around a character that you liked, you're like, please don't kill them. Like there's an absolute he couldn't kill anyone in that movie.
And even the other characters recognize it. Even T'Challa, he recognizes it. He doesn't take him lightly. I'm sure they kind of treat each other as equals for the most part, but you definitely see T'Challa's reluctance, or at least he thinks about things before he acts. Yeah. And you see that in Chadwick Boseman's expressions and whatnot. So actually, sidestepping into T'Challa's character, I think they're polar opposites, and it's really interesting. I think I mentioned this earlier, that T'Challa kind of represents tradition, whereas Killmonger represents progress and change. Maybe not the best progress and change.
But
maybe it's just about the means of how he went about it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but it's not even just that. Like Killmonger is, he has such a great conviction to his ideas. Nobody can tell him otherwise. He's not going to stop at any cost. Whereas T'Challa, he considers other people's opinions. He's a lot more measured of a person.
He's a king.
He's a king. Chadwick Boseman felt extremely regal in this movie. He is a king. He listens to his people and his advisors, and he tries to think about what's best for everybody, not just.
I think it's really important to distinguish, though, before we step in further into T'Challa's point of view, how it was left with Killmonger. You have two completely different scenarios where one child's raised in Compton, now is fatherless, and then you have another one who has the complete support of the entire country, his family. They're all loving, devoted. So it just brought up two completely different ideals. and it was just a matter of circumstances. It could have been either way.
It definitely could have been either ways, but yeah, and the movie presents it as such at some points, I feel.
Because both of them have very strong convictions, different ideas, but that's just the ideas that you're presented with that you have to grow up with.
Yeah, exactly. Like you're a product of your environment at the end of the day, and you can and should make changes once you're an adult to better yourself. But
It's definitely ingrained. It's very difficult to get out of it if you feel something's not right.
And I feel like, just like you said, it's important to recognize that. I think it is important to recognize that Killmonger is a product of the system.
Yeah.
Like in a lot of ways, there's a certain character that's blamed for creating Killmonger, and we'll talk about that more in spoilers later. But I think that character might also represent just the system, the status quo. That Killmonger grew up that way. He's not really responsible. I mean, he is now because he's a grown-ass man, but he's not responsible for the things he was taught.
Right.
The life he lived.
And like any of us, we're only responsible for how like what we deal with, what we're taught versus how the world is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
How we amend that.
Yeah, and in general, I really like T'Challa. I feel like when we mentioned he's very regal and he's very refreshing as opposed to like other Marvel heroes.
He's not quippy.
He's not quippy, exactly. He's not, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, Tony Stark, even like Star-Lord, they're just fucking quip machines, right? But he's also not boring.
Yeah.
He's riveting, and he can take a joke, and he laughs and stuff. He just isn't the first one to make a joke.
Seeing him his sister's kind of quippy.
Yeah.
And seeing them interact is wonderful. It's so much fun to watch them because he's very regal, but like he can take the joke. When he's being outfitted for a mission.
Yeah.
She's giving him some of these devices, and she tricks him into kicking a suit, and it causes him to go flying while he's being recorded. And immediately it's like delete that footage.
Yeah.
Like he's not mad, but he's like that's not good. That's not good enough.
Delete that shit.
I think it's definitely amazing with how we're saying that he's very regal and he's the king of this entire country, and how his sister, she's constantly testing him about his position in power. She's like, oh, we better watch your step or I'm going to be,
But it's not even like in a real way. It's more like she's teasing him like a little sister might.
Yeah, there's the ritual combat scene early on in the movie, and Priest, the shaman figure, he asked, like, is there anyone of royal blood that wants to challenge the throne? Like, this is your chance to do that. And she raises her hand, like, and everyone thinks, like, oh my God, she's gonna challenge the throne. And she's like, nah, I just want to get out of this corset. Like,
like, please, let's wrap this shit up. I want to go home.
Yeah.
I definitely think that was their dynamic it's great to watch. Yeah. And actually, speaking of that scene, that translates into another character, M'Baku. He also feels like a big threat for most of the movie.
He's a big man.
He's a big man. He's a big boy.
Yeah.
And those scenes I think were beautiful. There's two ritual combat scenes, not going too much into detail, but it's like on the precipice of a waterfall that's been drained slightly so the water isn't like rushing people off, and it's just gorgeous. Like every kick splashes water like up into the camera in like slow motion and stuff, and it's just very well shot. It's gorgeous. How did you guys feel about that?
Loved it. The environment in general was very entertaining to watch. They both used the water. It kind of, one of the things I didn't like about the scenes, specifically compared to each other, is it was kind of a format that they followed. Like one person would get a fall in, like they would fall into the water, and then the other person would get kicked into the water, and then there would be a climax, and then the fight would end. It was that case in both scenes. So I felt it was kind of canned in that, but besides that, it was very beautiful. Like it was very fun to watch. And then the fighting styles, specifically the second scene, not going into too much detail. Okay, so Killmonger's in this ritual combat scene, and he's utilizing like actual Zulu fighting style. Like he's given a spear and a sword, and he breaks that spear in half, and it becomes the short spear that the Zulu used when they were fighting in Africa. So it was just interesting to see that they pulled real life fighting styles for these scenes.
And I think that's another example of the movie really doing its research.
Highlighting the culture. Yeah.
I guess from visually standpoint, when you have all the four tribes layered out, I thought that was really beautiful because you saw not only the different colors representing of each tribe, but you also see in certain aspects the different, even certain cultural garments, I guess, that you could see that even though they're all Wakandans, there's still so many varying degrees of what they are. And I thought that was really important to represent. And definitely the first waterfall scene I appreciate, besides a visual standpoint, the humanity that's displayed from T'Challa's standpoint to another character that he's in combat with, and I definitely appreciated that.
Yeah, yeah. He says like, you know, the rules of the original combat are yield or die, and that's the only way it can end. And you know, he gives the other opponent every opportunity to yield so that he can go back to leading his people because his people need him. And yeah, there's a lot of that. Like, I think that comes full circle later on in the movie, and we'll talk about that in spoilers.
But T'Challa's regal even in like a very visceral fighting moment. Like in fighting, like a lot of times people lose like some part of like some measure of thinking because in that moment you're trying to win the fight. But even in that, T'Challa is still very like he knows what every action that he's doing will have a consequence.
He knows the consequences.
Yeah, he has the
of
forward thinking of
Yeah.
it, and it's
And he has to remind his opponent of that.
Yeah.
Because his opponent's like, kill me. But you know.
Yeah,
so.
definitely. So that's definitely a trait of T'Challa that we see throughout the movie, the humanity, and also the lack. Well, I was gonna say the lack thereof. There's an opportunity where he has to attack or kill an antagonist, and if he were allowed to, he would have taken it, but somebody else stopped him.
Yeah.
But even then, he was doing it for his people. Because there's that scene with W'Kabi where W'Kabi lost his family, and W'Kabi's now one of the leader of the tribes, and he's like, "We found Claw, bring him back or kill him," you know. And so T'Challa feels that responsibility to his people.
Yeah, considering even though that they're very good friends, I guess you could,
Yeah, they grew up
you
together.
Could, you
They
could say
see-
they're best friends, and the fact that he was gonna hold that promise to W'Kabi, but understanding that as bad as he wants to take, you know, Claw's life, he can't.
Yeah.
There's too much at stake for him. He's
It's in a very public setting.
yeah. It's not appropriate.
I saw something on Twitter actually where it kind of discussed that scene and specifically where T'Challa's reminded like the world is watching, and the person that was discussing it was saying that like for Black people in general, a lot of times every action that you do, you have to think like, will this further the stereotype?
And that's definitely just a reality. Yeah, and I think T'Challa is in particular a great protagonist because he grows throughout the story. I mean, at the beginning of the story, he's very, because it's what he's taught by his father and his mother, he's very steadfast in their traditions. By the end of the movie, so much has happened, and he's learned so much from all these characters, especially Killmonger, that he decides, no, things have to change for the world and us to progress. It's not just about Wakanda, it's about all Black people. It's not just about all Black people, it's about everybody in the world.
We're all one tribe.
Exactly, we're all one tribe. And that's like the last line that he has in the movie, or one of them. And so I think there's a lot of growth in him, and you have to respect and like, you know, you feel for that character because of it.
It's great because it's one of the worst things when you have a character that initially you enjoy how they start off in the film, and it's the worst when sometimes they may show a little bit of character development, but then maybe they'll backpedal it. But I appreciate that it's constantly flowing, and that he's willing to change, and it's indicative of his character.
100%.
And it gives so much more depth and clarity to the character, which makes the films that much better.
Yeah, and you know, I think the relationship between T'Challa and Killmonger, and even some of the other characters like Okoye and Nakia, they really explore some interesting and, at least for my opinion, unique themes, especially definitely among comic book movies, and I think among Hollywood, like big Hollywood blockbusters in general. I was honestly shocked. They explicitly explore what it is to be loyal, what it is to be a patriot even, and beyond that, what a people is. I think that's definitely the deepest and most affecting question that the movie asks, and I think tries to answer. Well, maybe not even tries to answer, but calls attention to a lot.
That's one of the things I really respect about this movie is it doesn't really feel like it's shoving anything down your throat. Like for the most part, the movie is just about discussing, and like in the movie itself, the discussion takes place in like actual fighting, but for the most part, it's a war of ideas.
Yeah, it's a war of ideas, and it feels like that, especially because movies in general are a way to communicate, and it's communicating. I feel like it communicates its ideas very well to the audience, and honestly, I feel like the movie's saying like we don't necessarily have the answers yet, but the only way we're going to get those answers is if we work together.
Yeah, it's also more of I feel the movie does a really good job of just like you said, it doesn't really shove anything down anyone's throats, but it makes you think, at least ponder these questions, these ideas. Because I remember we were having a discussion about what it means to be a people, and we were discussing it, and we got into this huge rabbit hole, and we didn't even know what it meant to be a people, because it's so, where do you draw the lines? Where does it end? Where does it begin?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there's layers to this movie.
Oh, yeah.
There's layers to this shit you and I know.
Be humble.
The fucking, you see it like the tribes, right? They're all Wakandan. but the Jabari consider themselves separate, you know? But at the end of the day, they're still Wakandan, right? The Wakandans consider themselves separate from Africa, but at the end of the day, they're all Africans. They consider themselves separate from black people, like in Oakland, well, everywhere. But I said Oakland specifically because of Killmonger's characters from there. But at the end of the day, they're all black. And then the races are separate, but at the end of the day, we're all human.
We're all from Africa. And that caught some flack from some people. But early on in the movie, Killmonger's like, how can you abandon these people? Like, in the end, everyone's from Africa. Everyone is your people.
So, exactly. Yeah, and I think it's just very on the nose, but not in a bad way. Right. You know, it's just it hits home for me personally because I thought about that and I'm like, that's actually really interesting. Like, where do the lines begin and where do they end, and do they mean anything? Because you see, you even see the characters realize that they don't mean anything. Like M'Baku, with the Jabari, the mountain tribe, they consider themselves separate from the other Wakandans, but when push comes to shove, they know that they're all fighting for their homeland. And you know, with the way that the movie ends, Wakanda, I mean, it's not really a spoiler, but T'Challa decides to provide outreach support to other, to impoverished neighborhoods and stuff, or to start
to
doing
the world.
That.
He provides outreach for the entire world.
For the entire world, yeah. And so it's like characters are learning that those boundaries don't necessarily mean anything.
I think it definitely comes from when you see the growth that is attributed to Killmonger displaying certain ideas to T'Challa, where he has to kind of sit back and think, is all this tradition necessary? Yes, it's important, but it gets to the point where there are people, you know, suffering, hurting all across the world, and it kind of makes you think. It stops becoming more of a racial thing. It starts becoming more of a humanitarian aspect.
We're all people.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned like the tradition is important. It is 100%. It's where we come from. It's our culture. But I think T'Challa and the movie's telling us to find a balance between progress and tradition. You can't hold steadfast to either idea. Because if you forget where you came from, then how do you know where you're going? And if you only focus on where you came from, then you're never going to go anywhere.
Yeah. Like Killmonger focused on just where he came from and like how angry, like his anger drove him.
Yeah.
And it didn't, I can't say this without spoilers.
I think it's the way the movie, you touched on it a little bit, the way the movie communicates these ideas through fighting is interesting because it is a comic book movie at the end of the day, which is, you know, why, even if you don't like the movie, if you really take away any bias you have for it, right, you should at least understand and respect the fact that this movie does a lot for, like, it tackles really interesting themes for being a comic book movie. Like, this is one of the last movies that I would have expected to cause a political dialogue amongst people, you know? Yeah. It's a comic book movie. But, you know, being that it is that, it has its limitations, or not even limitations, but it has its...
it has to stick to the theme.
It has to stick to its roots, so there's a lot of fighting, and in general, I think it's done very well. What about you guys?
So I really enjoyed the fighting scenes. We touched on this earlier about the ritual combat with Killmonger and T'Challa. Killmonger utilizes Zulu fighting styles specifically. I didn't get a chance to look into it more, but just from the amount of detail that was paid attention to, just like that, I feel like there's fighting scenes later on in the movie that probably do employ specifically African fighting styles. So it'd be interesting to kind of look into that more. But Ryan Coogler definitely does the research, and it turns out beautifully.
Yeah, definitely. I think in general the action's pretty. It's you know, it's always one of the two. It's either fun and like almost lighthearted because you know they have vibranium armor and shit, so it's like they're not really in too much danger, or there are scenes that require them to either fight people in vibranium armor or just to fight without any armor, and it's like it feels very real.
When the ground is equal, it's a very tense moment.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think that it does that well. And
there's definitely some like token Marvel fighting humor. In one of the scenes, a bad guy gets blasted off the edge of a cliff by a jet taking off, and it's like the comical yell, like oh, you know, it's. God, I hate that I made that sound. Go. But yeah, so there's a lot.
It's gonna be a loop, isn't it?
I definitely think that in terms of the comedy and the fighting styles, they didn't go over the top with the comedy. because I feel Marvel at times can overdo it a bit, and it can take away from the
Detract from it.
seriousness from the film. But I felt like it was a good amount of comedy in terms of the dialogue as well as the fighting styles and scenes.
And it wasn't to the detriment of the characters. For example, we mentioned this earlier. T'Challa's not cracking jokes. You know, he's funny because he's a serious character put in funny situations, but he remains true to his character. That he's serious. He's a king. He's not He
has good humor, but he's not quippy.
Yeah.
That word.
Quippy.
Dale. Yeah, because you gotta really hold on, wait. This is what I'm about to say.
Yeah, so
I know it's.
I can tell you want to get into it. You're just like,
Yeah, so we'll save that for spoiler talk.
you're like, please, just let me do it, please.
Jesus.
And in particular, the action, but the whole movie, I think, benefits a lot from the music. The music is, like we've been talking about, it's very heavily inspired by a lot of African, instruments, chanting, even, African animals. You can hear them kind of, chirping and humming in the background, whether it be, I don't know, African birds. I don't know. I'm not an ornithologist, but you
Whatever
can hear
the
birds
birds-
screeching
yeah.
and shit.
Yeah.
You can hear monkeys
gives it that
shouting in
feeling.
the back. Yeah, it feels. You listen to the Kendrick album, which is heavily inspired by it, and some of the songs are used in the album, in the movie, or the score, and it just feels very interesting. I personally feel like I haven't listened to anything like that before. Mostly because I don't go out of my way to look at African music, but this isn't a mainstream movie. It's in a blockbuster, which I think is why it deserves attention.
Specifically for Kendrick's album, I really loved it. I've only recently gotten into hip hop, I guess.
I've only recently listened to the rap.
way he
the
goes
rap
about it.
basically. But there was my girlfriend listens to reggae a lot, and so I've kind of I've kind of heard it in the background. But I forget which song specific. I think maybe Seasons in Kendrick's
love
album.
Seasons.
But there's definitely the reggae feel to it, and so it showcases a lot of stuff. And I would never have come across that if it weren't for this movie.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's beautiful music. It's not something I would have gone out of my way to find, but I'm glad that I found it.
And even the music that's not beautiful and it's great. Like for example, King's Dead is probably my favorite song off the
man.
album, and it is just raw anger. And
Guttural,
the last verse is sung or it's rapped by Kendrick from the perspective of Kilmonger, and you feel all of Killmonger's anger and pain in there. But like all movies, it's not perfect, right? I think some things could have been done better. But we'll get into that in a second. But I just, I feel overall extremely positive about the movie. It is just a movie, but it does a lot and it's very ambitious, right? And it deserves its respect for that, at the very least.
Yeah, it goes hand in hand because it's just a movie, but on other sides of the spectrum, it leaves such a cultural impact on a lot of people, not just in the United States. That's why I feel there are certain times I get that can be a divide when we're talking about the film politically, especially that there needs to be more of an understanding that we can take from T'Challa learning that we need to communicate better with each other, and I also feel that we as just human beings can take that from the film to better understand why this film feels so important to a lot of people.
And why it doesn't feel important to other people.
Yeah.
And I feel like at the end of the day, it comes down to empathy.
Exactly.
It's not my culture, but I recognize that it's beautiful, and I'm happy for those people who are. I'm sure a lot of black people don't know that much about African culture. And so for a lot of them, this might be their cultural awakening where they go and they start learning about
taste.
it. Yeah, exactly. And I think, I'm happy for them. I don't have to be them to understand it. And just like you don't have to be black to understand it.
Yeah, and I'm obviously the furthest you can get from the culture that's in this movie. But
Scottish.
I'm Scottish. I'm literally so far away. But I've really enjoyed it, and I'm really happy for people that are able to look at this and be proud. There's so much history that's happened in Africa. For
Literally,
Europeans,
all history
has
history
stemmed from-
started in Africa.
Exactly. But a lot of some of the terrible things in human history has come from it. The European guilt is almost exclusively in Africa. Obviously it's worldwide, but there's so many things that have been acted upon the continent and the people that are within it. But at the same time, there's a lot to celebrate, specifically from the cultures.
Yeah,
So I think it's one of the things I've been criticized because obviously it's not my culture, but I've been criticized for really enjoying it and getting into it, and I think that's just wrong. The best way you can honor a culture and show them this is value is by learning about it and by celebrating.
100%,
and this movie does that.
And I think at the end of the day, there are separations between us, but those separations should serve as bridges to cross, and meet, and to ideas to exchange,
And we can touch on that bridge idea later.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you feel about the you know, because I personally feel like it even it was so empowering to see that it even caused almost like a cultural awakening in myself, where I'm like, I kind of want to learn where I come from now. Whereas before, it wasn't of any real personal importance to me, because I'm like, I was kind of like a less militant Killmonger. Where I was just like, I don't really care where I come from. I care about where I'm
Where
going.
you are now and where you're going.
Exactly. But now I'm like, I mean, you know, it's important to know that.
I definitely realized when I was sitting in the film when watching it with Sammer, that throughout the whole movie, I had, not to seem, you know, like I'm exacerbating it, but I had chills many of the times going through the movie, because even though I'm not black, but because we're Hispanic, and even though you can appreciate it as well, that you get this sense of pride in, I'm not, you know, African or whatever the case is, but I can still respect that there's this sense of pride that goes into it as well, that, like you said, you kind of want to detail, like really know, you know, who am I, kind of figure out what are the roots that come from, because it's very easy to get generalized in a specific group, and it leaves you with a sense of empowerment, which is really important for people to have.
Definitely, yeah. And a lot of people have been talking about how, well, not a lot of people, but certain individuals have been saying like, oh, well, what about Blade? Like, why is this such a big deal? Which I think is initially ridiculous, just because it's like, okay, Blade is a movie from the late 90s. You're telling me that it was reasonable for it to take 20 years for black people to feel empowered again by a superhero, or even like, you know, just a mainstream movie where they're the protagonist like this. So that initially is just ridiculous. And secondly, I'm sure there have been movies in between, but just because they decided on pointing Blade out in particular.
Right.
But beyond that, Blade was just a movie about, you know, a vampire. It was just a movie with
A black vampire?
he's
Yeah,
half vampire.
that was it. That was it.
He's just a black character, you know? Black Panther is a celebration of what it means to be black and where black people come from. It's extremely different. And I think that, like, comparing the two like that in that manner, where you're just like, oh, like, you know, it's not that big of a deal, it's kind of ignorant. It's almost like willfully ignorant. Like, you're looking for
ignoring
reasons
the whole draw of Black Panther.
Yeah, like you're looking for reasons to undermine people's excitement about the movie. And it's like, even if you hate the movie, why do you want to take away other people's excitement about it?
It's just trolls.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with you. Yeah. And it's not even like traditional trolls. It's like, you know, TV personalities, like well-known people. I'm not going to throw names out
They
there.
have large influence.
I would say they're still trolls.
Well, yeah, they're not traditional trolls.
Right.
Yeah.
On a large scale, and they have influence, which is the scariest part, because then that dilutes into the
because other people will watch that and be like, oh yeah, like he's got a point.
That makes sense.
Doesn't have a point.
I agree with that, and it's kind of like this idea of like, oh, you got Blade, so it's kind of more of like, oh, you should be happy that that's what you got.
Here's your crumbs.
Like, yeah, kind of stay in your place kind of mentality, and it's like, but that's never said directly, but those are the undertones you're getting from it. So it's definitely disappointing to see that people feel that way.
And I think, you know, not credit where it's due, but to be fair, to be very clear, I don't think white people are villains.
Colonizer.
I just think that a lot of times they're so separated geographically and culturally from the plight of black people that it's difficult for them to understand and relate to it. And I think it just takes maturity and desire to improve yourself to really get past that. And I think that mentality where it's like that stay in your placeism, I don't even necessarily think that it's intentional. It does exist, but it's more like it's the typical mentality. Racism doesn't exist anymore. Like the average person can just go about their day and not really think about it. But like, no, it really does exist. It's systemic racism that's alive in our judiciary system. Yeah. That's alive in in all these things. It's like systemic racism that but like they say in the movie over polices and over patrols black people. And other minorities. It's like you don't really think about it when you come from privileged areas, and I recognize that I come from a privileged area, but I can at least see that. You know, I can look beyond my immediate surroundings and understand that there are other places and other situations in the world.
And that's the thing, like in order to see beyond literally just what you see every day, because a lot of times people are saying like, oh, that's not in my neighborhood, so it can't, like it must not be in their neighborhood. But it, like in order to see how other people see the world, you actually have to take the effort, go out of your way to seek like how they feel, and some people, they don't either want to put in the effort or don't feel like the effort's necessary.
Yeah.
So, and that's just something we have to get past.
And that's what keeps the constant divide between different ideas and ideologies and just people not getting to terms with it. Because a lot of people were just upset that, yeah, like you said, the movie was overhyped in certain aspects, which wasn't fair to the film. And then that's why there are some people that are really upset, like, why are people making such a big idea about it? Because it's everywhere. It's on all social media platforms. It's
And
everywhere.
it's still a
like
minority, but it's a loud minority.
yeah. So
Yeah, but I think just the fact that it's causing this conversation
is important.
And you know, I would have almost liked to have somebody from the other side to talk about this with, but we don't because it makes sense. All our friends are like-minded for the most part.
On that subject, we obviously don't have a ton of viewers right now, but if you're watching this and you do have like the opposing side, please be thoughtful about it, but let us know in the comments.
Yeah, because we'd love to.
We'd love to have a discussion.
Yeah, a discussion.
Yeah.
We'd love to cross a bridge and meet in the middle and shake hands and exchange ideas. Yeah. I think that's a big thing that this movie's preaching.
Bridges, not walls.
Yeah.
no hints at anything.
Just gonna keep dropping that throughout the podcast.
Yeah. All right, so yeah, let's cross over into our spoiler talk, and let's start off with the biggest one, Killmonger's death.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have something specifically you want to say about it? Or?
I do, but you guys can start.
I feel like you want to go in it because you were just ready to just tear into it.
I'm really upset that he died specifically. I think that, and obviously, his death adds more meaning to it.
I'm about to tear you apart.
Oh yeah, I know.
Man.
I know.
Verbally.
Okay, go.
Well, so like he dies obviously, and it's like I think he would have been so much more valuable to the world and specifically Wakanda if he had been an advisor. Like maybe not even like an official advisor, but if he had been allowed to, because he had some very good points and his points swayed T'Challa.
Almost like a Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lamb and Clarice Starling, how Anthony Hopkins is Hannibal Lecter. He's a serial killer, but Clarice Starling goes to him for advice.
Exactly. Yeah. Like there's still. Every human life has value. You can learn something from everyone. And specifically, I think Killmonger has a lot to be learned from. But his death it has meaning.
Yeah, it has a lot of meaning.
Especially his final words.
And like you just said, everybody has something to learn from. I think audiences can learn the most from Killmonger because he died and because he was so strong in his convictions.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because he very clearly chose death. T'Challa says, "We can save you," and he's like, "Nah, fuck that." And his
do you remember the exact line?
I do remember the exact line.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like, "Nah, just bury me at sea like my ancestors that jumped off ships because they knew that death was better than bondage."
And honestly, talk about that delivery of that line was we were talking about how it was very interesting where it felt like he was reading.
I actually have goosebumps right now just from saying it.
It was like he was reading the script right in front of him, but it didn't feel as if it was bad acting.
I wouldn't say it's that he was reading the script. It felt like it was a piece of poetry that he had rehearsed, that
recited.
he knew.
And it
almost like he always knew he was gonna die like that, or maybe not that he knew he was gonna die.
He was gonna go out.
Just that those that live by the sword die by the sword.
Yeah.
And that could have, maybe not even something that he'd rehearsed in his mind, but, just his philosophy. Yeah. It's better to die than live in bondage.
Yeah.
Which is probably, obviously it's a movie, but it's how it flowed so easily from him.
Yeah.
But
I think it's attributed to how he said he would have preferred if he lived. I don't agree with that, just because he was already at a point where he was so convinced in his beliefs that even though T'Challa was so empathetic and forgiving that he was like, we can heal you, you can be together with us. He was so far gone and in his upbringing and he caused a lot of damage that he, not just what we had seen, but what he had talked about, that he couldn't see himself going through that. It's too radical of a change for him to just do a 180.
Not only that, but he also knew that he would live a prisoner, and that's why he said the bondage line.
Well, and that's another thing. I don't think necessarily that he would have had to, because. And I understand, obviously he's very strong in his convictions, but in a normal movie, he would have died down there in the tunnels. As soon as that sword went in his heart, there would have been some twist or something, he would have died. But instead, T'Challa, I was almost in awe by the amount of respect that was displayed because T'Challa carried him up to the top to see the sunset. And there was a lot of respect between them. They were talking at that point. They were discussing their ideas. They were not. It was not just the banter of a battle anymore.
Yeah. I mean, because when he strikes the finishing blow, Killmonger looks at him and says, it's almost heartbreaking because he says, my father always told me that the sunsets in Wakanda were the most beautiful thing he ever seen. And without words or anything, T'Challa immediately understands and he gives him that mercy and he
gives him that sunset.
Yeah, he carries him up to where he can see the sunset.
It's so beautiful. I just love it.
Yeah, it's fucking great. Although, so not every movie's perfect. I kind of think the third act in general falls off a little bit, but the first two acts are so good for me. I enjoyed them so much that it's very easy to forgive the third act. And even then, the third act, it has a lot of interesting ideas. It continues that trend. It's just that the action in it is a little lackluster.
It didn't fail, but it was still.
Yeah, it didn't fail. It's just not as good and up to par as the first two acts.
Yeah, because you had just obviously we talk about how movies have this flow, and it kept you like paced in with the amount of really well choreographed words.
Combo breaker.
What Gooch said, choreographed fight scenes, and then you're feeling that throughout. So then when it kind of dips a little bit near the end, it's a little disappointing, but nonetheless, it's a great movie
for sure. So back to spoilers.
Yes.
Yeah, that act of mercy was especially, and I think his death serves the movie as opposed to in most Marvel movies, whatever happens has to serve the universe as a whole, because it would make sense. And a lot of people would enjoy seeing Killmonger brought back like in Infinity War,
Fighting side by side.
Yeah, it would he's like T'Challa goes into the dungeons. He's like, "Yo, we're Hulk. Like we need all the hands we can get. Here is the Black Panther suit. We got to go fight a giant space monster."
Okay, I'm going to change my position on that, because I do think that his death now, because otherwise it would be Thor. It'd be Asgard and Loki coming back again and again, and then Marvel will not have a chance to ruin Killmonger.
But yeah, I mean, I think the second time I watched it, I was very moved by that. So some other spoilers. Agent Ross. I liked Agent Ross in it,
Yeah.
The token white boy, token colonizer.
Don't scare me, colonizer.
On the subject of that word, what is y'all's opinion on it? Because I have a personal opinion on it, but I want to hear what y'all think
like
about
how
it.
so, like the fact that it was used in the
fact that it's used and it was kind of like a throwaway, like just as a reference to white people.
I can understand why it can come off like a little abrasive, and it can definitely be like when in being at a movie theater, you can be like, right? But I don't think people should take a deliberate jab like, oh, what are they trying to say about me? Considering being white. I just think like it's pertinent. It's history. That's why it's being said. But I don't think anyone should take it too literally.
I think it's kind of knowing where you come from. You can't forget that.
Right.
I understand why it bothers some people, but I think within the context of the movie, it's like a racist calling, for example, 12 Years a Slave. They say the N-word and slave, they call black people slaves constantly in that movie because it makes sense within the confines of the story.
Yeah.
And I think
people understand it.
Yeah, and I think here, and this movie's harping so much on, you can't forget where you come from and only focus on where you're going, or forget where you're going and only focus on where you're coming from. You have to find a balance in the middle. I think it is important for for people in general to remember the past and remember that white people did some fucked up shit.
It happened. That's what is important, because it needs to be reminded.
Yeah,
it's not to give you feel guilty. It's just it happened. And it needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and now it won't happen again. Ideally.
Ideally, and I do get where you're coming from with that, and I'm not like offended by it, but I do like when she said that to Agent Ross, and the fact that he's a CIA agent for the United States.
He is literally a colonizer.
Currently a colonizer. Like the CIA is currently still doing the things that colonizers were doing.
Surreptitiously.
Surreptitiously. But I feel like if he was just another white guy, she would have still called him a colonizer.
Yeah.
And I feel like it comes to the point of like, at what point do the sins of the father stop being paid for by the descendants?
Well,
right?
I would argue that that wasn't a punishment. Like he didn't pay anything.
Well, no, it's not a punishment, but it's more like
being put on you.
If one of y'all called me a colonizer, and in a serious tone, like not necessarily like a joke, like what you've been doing, you asshole, but like as a serious thing, like just a constant reminder, like your people did this to my people. It'd feel like I have not done that. Like I'm very opposed to that. I think it was a terrible thing that was done. But like, don't beat me over the head with it.
Yeah.
And obviously, this movie didn't do that. They said colonizer like once or twice, but
they said it a few times. Killmonger says it a couple times.
Yeah, but it's not to the point where like, because a lot of people are saying like, oh, it's a very anti-white film. I don't feel that at all. It's not that at all.
There's a anti-white character in it.
One,
who is
and
the antagonist.
he is the villain. Yeah. But I just feel like, at some point you have to build allies instead of calling out people.
100%.
Yeah.
I think it was, in terms of the movie, because it happened, I think it was just the movie, putting the events in the movie in context, like showing us how a lot of people still see white people and why they might feel the way they do, specifically Killmonger, why he might feel the way he does, but I definitely understand the gripe with it. I just feel like it's kind of I feel like if it made you uncomfortable, it's to a degree what the movie was trying to do.
To make you think.
Yeah, to make you think. And well, why would they call me that? Is that fair? You know, and that's another topic that the movie addresses. When did, like you mentioned, when did the sins of the father stop affecting the son? That's actually direct. Oh, we didn't talk about the heaven scenes.
Oh man.
Damn.
Well, that's a spoiler.
Yeah, that is a spoiler.
So we can discuss it
Yeah,
now.
and you see that in particular when T'Challa literally says that to his dad. He's like, when T'Challa almost dies because Killmonger straight up like throws him off a water, like stabs him in the stomach and throws him off a waterfall. He eventually goes to back to the afterlife and sees his dad, and he's like, son, it's time for you to join us. Like, no, I have to fix your mistakes because your mistakes, your inability to do what was right, because
Threatens Wakanda.
Yeah, threatens Wakanda now, and I can't leave my people the way they are.
Which is actually pretty interesting because we're talking about how the interesting point of utilizing the word colonizer, and now you're talking about the complete flip side, the sins of the father. He has to clean the mess that is Killmonger. So it's
Black on
completely
black.
It's completely different, but it's the same. I don't know what I'm saying.
It's still issues. It's still things that need to be dealt with.
Yeah, I mean, you look at, and actually, I feel like that reminded me of something, or made me think about something. White people now have to clean up their problems.
And that's there's no denying that. And I was gonna touch on it later, but I think now's a good time. Is when I stepped away from this movie, the number one thing that I kind of pulled is like I wish that there was a Wakanda. The movie made me kind of want a Wakanda in the world because it ended with obviously Wakanda, a very rich nation, doing outreach for the world. And then I realized there's countries right now that could probably do that.
America.
Immediately.
Instead of building military bases, we could build outreach centers. And honestly, I feel like winning the hearts and minds of the people is proven to be better than
Military
just
bases
beating
are
them.
kind of outreach center. We hand out bullets. And
Oh my God.
But yeah, so there's nations right now that should be held accountable for not doing what Wakanda did.
yeah. Yep. And I think a lot of Killmonger saying like "Where were you?" and other characters saying like "Where were you?" in reference to Wakanda is because Wakanda is a fictional country. It's really saying it to those countries that have those resources available and aren't doing what they morally, I guess, arguably should be doing.
I mean, everyone benefits when everyone's lifted up. Right?
Exactly.
I don't benefit for having some homeless man in the street. Right? Like, I would actually be more benefited if he was working or had a house and wasn't a drain on society, whether or not you want to view it like that. But
that's potentially the fucked up part, though, because some, primarily the super rich, do benefit from that.
Because the resources aren't spread out.
Exactly. And you know, I'm a capitalist, personally. I believe that we should be in a system where, you know, you work for what you get, but pure capitalism never will work. That's
Just like pure socialism.
Yeah, exactly. You have to find a happy medium, and I think it's personally kind of ridiculous that a lot of countries, they haven't necessarily found that perfect system of government, but they're farther along that journey than we are, and we aren't taking cues from them.
Or we are Wakanda sitting in our past.
Yeah. But yeah, something that we didn't touch on was the heaven.
Yeah, ancestral plane.
Yeah, Wakanda heaven.
It was gorgeous.
It was very beautiful.
Very pretty, a lot of purple.
Very striking. I also think something that was equally striking was Killmonger's ancestral plane.
Oh yeah.
Because it wasn't striking. It was an apartment in Oakland.
Why do you think that Killmonger's father was not with? Obviously, he was not a Black Panther, but why do you think he was not with the other ancestors? He was alone in that apartment.
I think.
Or I guess he wasn't originally in that apartment. He appeared in it.
Yeah, I think it could be for a lot of reasons. I think it might even be because it could be for a lot of reasons. Like, for example, T'Challa was expecting that, so that's what he saw, and Killmonger doesn't remember anything. His ancestry is that apartment. Yeah. Okay. It could even be because Killmonger's father was a traitor, and he's been cast out.
Ooh, but exile in the afterlife.
Yeah, that's not a fun thought.
No, especially not in that apartment.
Yeah, or maybe you know, I'd like to believe that within the context of the movie, and you see how the movie kind of promotes T'Challa's final view as correct, mercy and all that stuff, that if we ask Ryan Coogler, I feel like there's a solid chance that he would say that T'Chaka in the afterlife gave Njobu mercy and allowed them, and that maybe it's just that Killmonger himself is stuck in that apartment because he never grew beyond that suffering.
So that's his
he always
perception.
kept it with him.
He was still that child. Like
Yeah.
when he was speaking to his father, he had the appearance of him as a child.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
I think it was interesting with how he was depicted as a child, and you can kind of see what was his father's name?
T'Chaka. Oh,
No,
Njobu.
Njobu. You can see kind of the disappointment that he kind of failed his son. It was completely different how the discussion between T'Challa and T'Chaka was like, oh, if you don't feel ready, a man is supposed to prepare his children for when they die, and he was still upset about that. And then on the other aspect of it, for Killmonger's father, you can kind of see that when he shed a tear, that he kind of failed his son. Obviously, he couldn't control,
yeah, he wasn't
being
he wasn't
murdered.
around, and it wasn't necessarily.
But he could say he
his
failed
fault.
him. Yeah.
I think actually Killmonger has some great lines in this movie. Everything from his death, the thing he says on his deathbed,
Death Rock.
Death Rock, Death Boulder. Even like when he's talking to the elders, all people are your people. But in particular, in the afterlife scene, he says his dad, when his dad says no tears for me, like because Killmonger's not crying for him. Killmonger just says, I think it's very poignant and talks a lot about the current state of things in like ghettos like Oakland and whatnot, where he's like, everybody dies. That's just the way it is around here. Like this little 12-year-old kid says that, and it's like it's very.
It brought his father to tears because it's,
Yeah.
just, it's like
It shouldn't be that way.
child shouldn't have to think that way.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's pretty fucked. What's it called? I those are some of my favorite scenes in the movie.
Definitely, because
His lines are my favorite.
Oh shit!
Lines overall.
I'm really glad I just remembered this. When T'Challa first talks, when he first goes to the afterlife, it's nighttime.
Yeah.
Because his father, it's the beginning of, or his father's like, it's the end of his father's time, and it's the beginning of T'Challa's trial. This whole movie could be considered T'Challa proving himself to be worthy of king. And so it's the end of his father's reign, nighttime, and the beginning of T'Challa proving himself that he is worthy of king. And so in the second heaven scene, it's dawn, because T'Challa makes that decision. He chooses, I guess, the right path, and he's the man that Wakanda needs. He's gone through all this hardship and has learned so much, and that's when he kind of denounces his father's actions. And he's like, I can't rest now because I have to fix what you've created. Those are by far some of my favorite scenes in the movie.
You definitely feel those scenes, especially in the plane, the ancestral plane, being that it was with Killmonger's father, and he was depicted as a child, and of course the lines, that contributed even farther into the fact that made him such a better villain. Because I think a lot of times you can feel detached from a villain in other films, and that's like Loki, like you said, he's a really good villain, but because of the actor, not because of the lines and how the story was brought about with him. But when you really relate to the character and such, and the fact that he died, it completely changes how you feel about him and how you can relate to it, and you can understand as to why he commits these atrocious things.
Yeah, definitely.
And those scenes are definitely attributed to that.
Yeah, and actually going back to his statement where he says everybody dies around here, that's just the way things are, I think that's a direct allusion to black on black violence in those neighborhoods, and how the system kind of promotes that and creates that atmosphere. And that's very well illustrated in the final conflict of the movie, is the Dora Milaje versus W'Kabi's tribe. W'Kabi's tribe is following Killmonger because technically he is the rightful king. The
technicality is up in the air, which is why they end up choosing. Which side to
they
be on,
choose which side is up, because the technicality would say that since T'Challa's still alive and he never yielded, the fight is still going. Nobody's king yet. But W'Kabi's tribe chooses Kilmonger, and the Dora Milaje choose T'Challa. And so it's a group of black people, one group dressed in red, the other group dressed in blue, fighting each other for arguably no reason. And I think it's just I've been using this word a lot, but it's super poignant. It's very like, it's a clear allusion to the futility of black on black violence with the Bloods and Crips. I think are central to this particular metaphor, and also just the fact that there's nobody gains anything from it, and that and finally the fight is stopped by W'Kabi understanding that this is pointless, and he throws his weapon down because, you know,
the fight had gotten to the point where he had to choose between whatever they were fighting for and killing his
Okoye,
fiance,
His
girlfriend, yeah, lover. Yeah.
Saito, you know.
Oh my God.
Also, she is no one's Saito.
Oh, that's what I'm saying. She's no one. She's got side hoes.
Yeah.
She's a fucking baller.
Yeah, seriously.
And you know that calls back to your statement earlier, how it's like there are a lot of very empowered women in this movie.
Oh yeah.
And I feel like black women in particular, they don't always have that representation. I wouldn't fuck with any girl in this movie, even Shuri, who's like a 15-year-old girl. She would fuck my ass up.
Yeah, it's
With her fist cannons.
Her like Panther gauntlet, sonic wave firing things. Yeah.
Can't wait for Suri to meet Tony Stark. Can't wait to see how that interaction goes, because she's confirmed as the smartest person.
I wonder how it will go though, because I hope it's not.
Like,
hope
you
it's
think
not,
I hope it's-
if they brush
did
it
not.
off,
I
or
hope-
if they're like
well,
they
no.
really go into detail about it.
I just hope it's not a rehash of him and Banner meeting where they're like, so they. It's kind of funny, but I don't want it to happen again. Where it's just like
It
they
needs to
nerd
be
out
new.
together. Yeah. Although it would be nice if he goes to nerd out with her and she's like, "I'm way smarter than you, dude. Don't even
Oh
try."
my God, that was so
Yeah,
great.
just brush them off.
Yeah. Like he's like, well, what about this equation? Like, no, that equation's wrong. Here's the you know,
Yeah.
that'd be kind of funny. But yeah, well, actually, Wakabi says at one point that the rest of the world is catching up. I think that's in direct statement to Tony Stark, and in particular his bleeding edge suit, which look from the Infinity War trailer, it looks almost like what I could imagine a prototype of the Black Panther suit looking. At least the way it comes onto him, because it's like nanites that like, you know,
Yeah,
form the
that's
suit
right.
around
Yeah.
him.
And is that in Infinity War?
Yes, it's in the trailer.
It's in
Yeah.
the trailer. I'll have to go back and look at it, but that's interesting.
Yeah, you see it very briefly. It's a shot of it forming around him, and then you see like Doctor Strange fly by. I am so hyped. I think that's all I wanted to talk about. How about you guys?
I
Just to the
can't
point.
stress enough the message of building bridges.
And just being more empathetic with each other, even
Definitely.
though we come from so many different backgrounds and beliefs and systems that it's just initially it can be very enticing to just say that's wrong or I don't agree with that, but it's more of like kind of take a step back to look at the whole picture, the whole elephant, instead of just looking at its face value, and just being more forward thinking and trying to think beyond your scope of view.
Putting in the effort.
Yeah. You want to repeat what you were saying?
Yeah, I can't stress enough the message at the end of the movie, build bridges, not walls. I think that in general, the worst times in humanity, like World War I, World War II, have been when countries pull in on themselves and they're kind of like us versus them. And even like the worst part of Wakanda at the very beginning, where they're very isolationist, it's Wakanda and the rest of the world. And at the end of the movie, they take the step to kind of share, not wealth, but help.
Yeah,
And
share
that's all-
knowledge and
to lift each other up, as opposed to tearing each other down. Which even
definitely.
in the wake of this movie, the critics are doing. They're like, why do you enjoy
critics
this movie?
aren't. I think it's very
It's-
particular people.
I used critics in the loosest sense of the word.
Fair enough.
People that are criticizing the movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in the end, focus on lifting each other up, building these bridges.
Yeah. I think overall it was a great movie. You know, it's not like a masterpiece in the traditional film sense, but there's a lot in the movie. There's a lot to unpack, and it tackles a lot of very weighty and hard to discuss topics. And you know, like I said earlier, I think it deserves an incredible amount of respect for that. And I hope that discussions like this, and even discussions across sides, are happening all over because of this movie. I honestly feel like eventually they will. If not because of this movie, it would be because of the movies that this movie inspires, you know? But yeah, definitely go out and see it. I mean, it's a great time.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Definitely worth seeing.
Yeah. So thanks for watching, guys. If you liked it, right? It's always a pleasure entertaining you. If you liked it, like the video as well and subscribe. Also, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Cinema Schmucks. Always consistent. And
Just remember, we're the schmucking best.
shut up.
Leave it all.
If you have any ideas for future movies that you want us to review, I think we're going to be branching out into some Netflix movies pretty soon.
Yeah, actually, we just did The Babysitter.
These are the top results.
Why?
So
So be on the lookout for our review on The Babysitter.
yeah, and if you have any movies that you think that we should watch and discuss, just let us know.
Yep, just leave a comment below.
Leave a comment below.